Faceless Crimes, the night the mosque bled. It's Ramadan, the hour of evening prayer. Inside a small mosque on the edge of Omdurman, dozens of men kneel shoulder to shoulder, foreheads to the floor, mid-prostration, mid-devotion. The most vulnerable position a human body can be in. That's the moment he chooses. A man walks up to the window. He doesn't say a word. He doesn't shout a warning, doesn't give a demand. He simply raises a Kalashnikov and starts firing into the crowd. By the time it's over, 23 people will be dead, and the man holding the rifle isn't a stranger who wandered in off the street. He grew up 10 minutes from here. He used to pray in this exact building. This is Faceless Storyteller, and this is Faceless Crimes, the series where we look past the headlines and into the people behind history's worst massacres, one case at a time. Today, the December 2000 mosque shooting in Garaffa, Sudan, and the man Sudanese police called a lone gunman, even after witnesses swore there were 3. Garaffa is barely a village, a scattering of homes on the outskirts of Omdurman, the quieter twin city across the Nile from Sudan's capital, Khartoum. At its center sits the Al-Sunnah Al-Mohammedia Mosque, the spiritual home of a group called Ansar al-Sunnah, the supporters of the traditions of the Prophet. They're strict, but they're not violent. No political wing, no militia. Their closest ideological cousins are the Wahhabi scholars of Saudi Arabia, traditionalist, textual, and, crucially, non-confrontational about how their version of Islamic law gets enforced. That last part matters, because across town, another group believes the opposite. They're called Takfir wal Hijra, renunciation and exile, sometimes translated as atonement and self-denial. The name traces back to a violent 1970s offshoot of Egypt's Muslim Brotherhood, and by the time it reached Sudan, its core belief had calcified into something simple and dangerous. Sharia law should govern the country, and if it doesn't, force is not just permitted, it's righteous. Ansar al-Sunnah says, convince people. Takfir wal Hijra says, compel them. That argument had already turned violent in this exact neighborhood once before. In 1996, gunmen linked to Takfir wal Hijra opened fire on this same congregation, killing 12. The government promised it had rounded up everyone responsible. They were wrong. The man who walked up to that window on December 8th, 2000, had a name, Abbas al-Baqir. Abbas. 33 years old. Born in 1967 in the village of al-Baqir in Sudan's central Jazeera region. People who knew him describe someone who ran hot his entire life. His own uncle said Abbas's mother eventually left the family home, not because of a husband, but because of him. He fought constantly with his siblings. He accused his sister of dressing immodestly, even when she wore standard, conservative Sudanese clothing. He was, in his uncle's word, a source of relentless trouble. He went to Libya to study economics at Tripoli University. He didn't finish. He got deported instead. After organizing Islamist groups, the Libyan authorities considered a security threat, even by their own standards. Back in Sudan, he did what a lot of young men swept up in the country's ideological currents did. He joined the Popular Defense Forces, a government-aligned militia, and went south to fight in Sudan's brutal, decades-long civil war against separatist rebels. Separatist rebels. He came back trained. He came back armed. And at some point, he came back radicalized into Takfir wal-Hijra. Here's the detail that turns this from a stranger danger story into something colder. Abbas used to attend this mosque. Not Takfir wal-Hijra's mosque, this one. Al-Sunnah al-Mohammediyah. He had family in Garaffa, a brother named Ismail, and he'd visit regularly. But witnesses say he never actually prayed alongside the congregation. He'd show up, stand apart, and start arguments. Heated, theological, aggressive arguments about whose interpretation of Islam was correct. Eventually, it stopped being just arguments. He started threatening the prayer leaders by name. He threatened members of the congregation directly. The mosque took him seriously enough to file lawsuits against him. Police even detained him for 4 months back in 1998, along with roughly 20 other suspected Takfir wal-Hijra members after his threats escalated. He was released after telling authorities he'd repented, that he'd abandoned the group's ideology for good. He hadn't. Friday evening, the second bow of night prayers, deep in the fasting month of Ramadan, the mosque is packed. This is peak devotion, the time of night when attendance swells and everyone is exactly where Abbas knew they'd be. Witnesses would later tell reporters that gunfire seemed to come from 3 directions at once, and more than one person at the scene, including, notably, a police officer on site, insisted there had to be multiple shooters. Duto. Lutz. One officer described several men in traditional white robes opening fire together. A wire dispatch quoted a witness describing chaos. 3 directions of muzzle flash. No way for a man kneeling in prayer to know which way to run. Sudanese police would eventually reject all of it. Their official conclusion: Abbas al-Baqir Abbas acted completely alone. What isn't in dispute is what the rifle did. Abbas emptied magazine after magazine through the mosque window and, at some point, moved beyond it, out into the surrounding village, firing indiscriminately at anyone he found, killing at least 2 young boys in the process. And in the middle of that rampage, something almost stranger than the violence itself. Witnesses say he spared the women. At one point, a woman tried to flee past him, and he reportedly stopped and reassured her he wasn't going to shoot her. His war, apparently, was with the men of this specific congregation. Police finally arrived. 4 units converged on the scene. Officers ordered him to surrender. He didn't. They shot him dead on the mosque grounds. The first night's official count: 20 killed, 33 wounded, including 1 police officer caught in the crossfire. But bodies don't always stop dying when the shooting stops. 2 more victims, men over 50, succumbed to their wounds in the hospital over the following 2 days. The final toll, confirmed by Sudan's state news agency: 23 dead. By Saturday morning, an angry crowd had gathered outside the hospital in Omdurman, demanding revenge against Takfir wal-Hijra. President Omar al-Bashir, the general who'd seized power in a 1989 Islamist coup, and was, at that very moment, campaigning for position and parties were boycotting Mosque, personally visited the Mosque. Officials left the concrete floor unwashed for his inspection. Bloodstains still soaked into it, bullet holes still fresh in the cream-colored walls. Standing outside, Bashir made a promise. Today we vow to rectify laws in order to protect society from destructive and harmful ideas, he told the gathered crowd. A week later, that promise turned into raids. More than 65 senior members of Takfir wal-Hijra were arrested and pulled in for interrogation. Sudan's Interior Ministry publicly stuck to its story. Abbas acted alone, even as its own police officers and the witnesses who'd survived the night kept describing multiple gunmen in white robes who simply vanished into the dark and were never caught. Ansar al-Sunnah, the sect that had now been attacked twice in 4 years, issued a public statement afterward. They said Abbas had threatened their prayer leaders and members for years before he ever pulled a trigger. They said they'd already taken legal action against him, and they demanded, once and for all, that the government ban Takfir wal-Hijra outright. It's worth sitting with that for a second. This wasn't an act that came out of nowhere. There was a documented history, lawsuits, threats, a prior detention, a prior massacre at the same building 4 years earlier. Every institutional warning sign was already on file, and the response, both times, was to let him go. What makes this case genuinely unsettling isn't just the body count, it's the intimacy of it. This wasn't an outsider infiltrating a target. This was a man who grew up down the road, who had a brother living in that same village, who used to stand at the back of that exact mosque year after year, arguing with the very people he would eventually kill. The massacre wasn't political theater aimed at strangers. It was personal, close range, and, according to nearly everyone who survived it, not the work of one man alone, no matter what the official report says. Sudan called it a solved case within 48 hours. The shooter was dead, a motive was assigned, religious rivalry, not politics, and the file was closed. But somewhere out there, if the witnesses were right, 2 or 3 men in white robes walked out of that mosque and disappeared into the Omdurman night, and nobody was ever made to answer for it. That's the story of the December 2000 Garaffa Mosque massacre, one of the deadliest single acts of massacre in Sudan's modern history, and a case where the official record and witness accounts still don't fully agree. Fateh, so Faisal don't fully eat lot. If you want more cases like this, the ones where the lone gunman story doesn't quite hold together, subscribe to Faceless Storyteller and turn on notifications, because Faceless Crimes runs a new case every week. And if you've got thoughts on what really happened that night in Garaffa, drop them in the comments. I read everyone. I'll see you in the next case.